Hello, my name is Jan Todd, and I will be your instructor for the next 6 weeks as we learn more about youth ministry and ethics. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that the 11 of us will have. And I'm so excited about what we get to do together. First, I'm going to introduce a little bit about myself. I've sent a few emails. I try to be a high communicator, so you might hear or have read some of this already, but I am an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. I've served a total of 5 churches. My very first service was as a youth minister with my husband, Mitch Todd, at Lawrence First United Methodist Church in Lawrence, Kansas. We had a large youth group we inherited there and learned a lot. We were in seminary at the time. And I've been involved in youth ministry in one form or another. After ordination, serving churches, I have a high commitment to making sure that the youth of our church feel as if they are part of that body right now, right here. And that means they also have responsibilities to learn about their character and their ethical life. But that means that we too are challenged as youth directors, youth ministers, ordained deacon, whatever the title that you carry. And I think that's why this course will be very helpful in whatever you choose to do with your ministry in Jesus Christ. So let's get started with Unit 1. I will admit that when I first saw the readings, and Tertullian, I can't even say his name very well, was brought to the table, I thought, gosh, as a youth minister, did I even think to say, I have an ethical dilemma, and I think I'll turn to Tertullian to figure that out, especially with a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old or their parents. So I think it's interesting when you will see the whole breadth of what this it will entitle as far as your readings and the videos, and you'll think, gosh, is this a seminary course? One thing I will say is that this course is designed to not just be something that has you looking directly at youth ministry through that one lens, but that it's important for us to develop our character, our understanding of our ethic, and to understand that through the way in which we choose to believe. And that includes our doctrinal understanding based on our denomination or faith origin. It also involves us being aware that we can apply things that have happened throughout church history and making those decisions about our own ethic. And so I think that's important to point out. So although you may not necessarily say, oh, I'm going to talk to a young person about Calvin today, I highly would suggest, that being a nuanced setting, if you're going to do that, that this is a time for us to look at ethics as a whole. And so when I was looking at all of this work that we are looking at together, the 4 things came to mind. First of all, even though I didn't reference necessarily our church historians and our church theologians and our ethicists, I did look back to what my denomination would often say about how we ethically are supposed to act and also develop those to have a Christian ethic following Jesus Christ. And first and foremost, that's the question that is put on the table. How much of Jesus' life was something that would give us a sense of our own ethic? As we are followers of Jesus, as Stanley Hauerwas points out in his essay this week, we have to recognize how much we decide is part of our ministry based on following Jesus, and also how much of it is part of our tradition, and how much has been discerned through theology. So these are the 4 things I thought would be helpful for you to keep in mind as you look through all of the readings and watch the videos. First, I think it's important for us to look at the construction of the course. If you keep in mind as you do your sharing online and doing your posts, these are the 4 things that I think we're looking at. First of all, what does it mean to have a Christian ethic as a whole, as the body of Christ, and knowing that that goes beyond all lines, and how do we define that, and how do you define that? Second, how do you come out of a denominational stance, a non-denominational stance, an understanding of your Christian history? And how does the ethic of what you believe as you've adopted for your route, whether you are going to be ordained or whether you're serving as a youth minister or however you see yourself in ministry, what are the things that are part of your tradition and your history? What doctrine do you look to? Because that will be different for each one of us. And as we share, I invite you in your introduction to talk about your history of your church life. Who and how were you raised in the church? When did that happen? Are your stances a little different? And could you highlight a few of those? Make sure to bring those to the table, because we have to honor each other's background. But that also determines how we look at the ethic in which we continue to try to express. And so I invite you to do that. Third, I believe it is important for you to develop a Christian ethic, and that ethic be something that you can clearly define based on the larger scale of the church, based on your denomination, how you agree or disagree, or your history of the church. You may not be denominational, so I want to make sure to be honoring that. And the other piece that I want to offer is that your Christian ethic might be something someone taught you. How did that come to you, and how did you adopt that practice, and why did you adopt it? And that's important, because the last piece is the fourth most important thing is, how are you helping youth, children, families develop and think about a Christian ethic? I think there's four things that you have to think about as well. You have to teach them to discern, just like you are discerning. You have to learn how to practice it, and that means you're going to fail, and you have to make sure that they know this as well when you are working with your youth and your families. I will say, in youth ministry, you've probably experienced this. The real issue and dilemma is sometimes teaching parents or guardians some sense of how they are teachers, and that you're partnering with them on developing the character of these young people. And in this life that we live in, it's a challenge, but it's often done with authenticity. And that means that there's trial and error, and that you also have a clear definition of what you want to present. But you can recognize that there are times that you too have failed. And Jesus understands that, so I think you can too. The last thing I was going to say in regard to how I think that this can help you in developing families and youth is to give opportunities to practice an ethic. Maybe consider over the 6 weeks how, even if you're not directly involved with the youth team right now, if you were to be, how would you provide opportunity to talk about an ethic? And how would you allow yourself to put that into practice? I think practicum is the most important part of ministry. If you are doing the ministry as you follow Jesus, then you're actively being the church. And you can also be shaped along the way while you're teaching. One of my major things, I am also a PhD candidate and a teacher instructor at Emporia State University. And one of the things that I often have the students do is to teach. And I've talked to them several times about them being teachers, that they're a generation of adults that are teaching a next generation of adults. And that is a responsibility for all of us. It doesn't have to be authoritarian. It can be invitational, and it can also be representational of what you want to see as you leave a legacy to others. So, no, I haven't always turned to Tertullian. No, I haven't always turned to even John Wesley. He, in our history of the United Methodist Church, hasn't always been the greatest ethicist when it comes down to his personal life. So there's certain things there. But I do discern what I've learned from those who have gone before me. I also invite you to do another important thing as you look at the video that was presented by Dr. Anthony Headley, that you hear what he says about those boundaries. Boundaries are important. Sometimes, you might have boundaries that are like this or like this. Somewhere you've got to have a line that you are making a judgment with. And in my history of youth ministry, I've had to use those lines. Now, it doesn't mean that when a person passes that line that suddenly they're in trouble and you're the major authority. It means that you have to communicate, and you have to communicate well why a certain decision might be made, why it is that you believe this is not a Christian ethic and this is, and having a conversation. So it's not a wall. It's not a boundary that's meant to be a wall. It may be a slight line in the sand, which Jesus has, put those in the sand for people to consider, where you stand and face each other and you talk about that. And that might also mean that another person has a different view on a Christian ethic than you. That would include this class. Some of us might be pushing a line on some of the things that we are talking about. Be okay with that and just allow that boundary to be there, but not as a wall. Allow it to be a line so that you can step side by side or face each other and have an honest, loving Christian conversation. When doing that, that also means that you have yes and no's that are set at different boundary points than other people might. And so if we can respect that and do that in this 6 weeks, I think you're going to do a great job doing that with the rest of your ministry. It's a good place to practice. My final note is this. Please be present for each other. I think it's the most important thing for this class. I know I have a lot of things on my plate. I'm teaching 4 other classes and trying to get my graduate degree, and I can get crazy, but I'm going to try to be as present as possible. And I think if you can be present as well, it will make the biggest difference out of how we work over the next 6 weeks. Welcome. And again, if you ever need me, I'm going to say this at the end of every meeting. I'm a texter. So this is my number, and you can use it as often as you need. I also do respond to email and try to do that as often as possible. But if you have any questions or anything you need help with, please text me at 913-553-0267. Thanks for listening and looking forward to our conversations. God bless.